The rain poured down on the busy streets of London as people hurried past with umbrellas and newspapers over their heads. Sarah Mitchell, a 22-year-old art student, was running late for her evening class at the university. She had spent too much time at the library working on her final project about historical paintings. As she crossed the street near Buckingham Palace, Sarah's mind was focused on her assignment. She was thinking about the royal portraits she had been studying when she heard the loud honking of a car horn. The sound seemed far away at first, but then it grew louder and closer. Sarah looked up just in time to see a black taxi speeding toward her. The driver was trying to stop, but the wet roads made it impossible. Time seemed to slow down as Sarah realized she couldn't move fast enough to get out of the way. Her art supplies scattered across the wet pavement as she tried to jump to safety. The impact sent Sarah flying several feet before she hit the ground hard. Pain shot through her leg and arm as she lay there, unable to move. The rain continued to fall on her face as she drifted in and out of consciousness. People began to gather around her, their voices sounding distant and unclear. "Someone call an ambulance?" shouted the taxi driver, who had gotten out of his car and was kneeling beside Sarah. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. Other people started taking pictures and videos with their phones, but no one seemed to know how to help. Blood was seeping through Sarah's jeans from a deep cut on her leg. Her left arm was bent at an odd angle, and she could barely keep her eyes open. The cold rain made everything worse as she lay there waiting for help to arrive. That's when something unexpected happened. A tall figure in a red uniform appeared through the crowd. The people who had gathered around Sarah stepped back in surprise. It was one of the Queen's Guard, the soldiers who protect the royal family and stand watch at Buckingham Palace. The guard, whose name was James Thompson, had been walking back to the palace after finishing his duty when he heard the accident. Without thinking about protocol or rules, he pushed through the crowd to reach Sarah. His training as a soldier kicked in as he assessed her injuries. "Step back, please," James said firmly, but politely to the crowd. He could see that Sarah was badly hurt and needed immediate medical attention. The ambulance sirens could be heard in the distance, but James knew that every second counted. What happened next would be captured on dozens of phone cameras and would soon spread across the internet, touching the hearts of millions of people around the world. James Thompson had been a royal guard for 3 years, but he had never faced a situation like this. His training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, and that's exactly what he did now. He knelt down beside Sarah and quickly checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. "Double quotes, miss. Can you hear me?" James asked gently, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd and traffic. Sarah's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she looked up at him with confusion and pain. The crowd around them was growing larger by the minute. People were pointing and whispering, amazed to see a royal guard breaking protocol to help an injured civilian. Some were recording everything on their phones. While others were calling their friends to tell them what they were witnessing, James ignored all the attention and focused on Sarah. He could see that her leg was bleeding heavily, so he carefully removed his white gloves and pressed them against the wound to stop the bleeding. His red uniform jacket was getting wet from the rain, but he didn't care. "The ambulance is coming," James told Sarah, trying to keep her conscious. "You're going to be okay." "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "It hurts so much." "I know it does, Sarah, but you're brave." "And help is almost here," James replied, maintaining eye contact with her to keep her focused and awake. The ambulance finally arrived, its bright lights flashing and siren wailing. 2 paramedics jumped out and quickly made their way through the crowd. When they saw the royal guard kneeling beside the injured girl, they looked surprised but immediately got to work. "What's her condition?" asked the lead paramedic, a woman named Dr. Emma Collins. "Possible broken arm. Deep laceration on the left leg, and she's been drifting in and out of consciousness," James reported like the trained soldier he was. "I've been applying pressure to stop the bleeding." Dr. Collins was impressed by James's quick thinking and medical knowledge. She could see that his actions had probably saved Sarah from losing too much blood. The paramedics quickly set up their equipment and began working on Sarah's injuries. But then something unexpected happened. When the paramedics tried to lift Sarah onto the stretcher, she cried out in pain and grabbed James's hand. "Please don't leave me," she begged, tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. James looked at Dr. Collins, uncertain about what to do. He was supposed to return to his post at the palace, but this young woman needed him. The crowd watched in silence as the royal guard made a decision that would change both their lives forever. James looked down at Sarah's frightened face and made a decision that went against everything he had been taught about following orders. "I'll come with you to the hospital," he told her, squeezing her hand gently. Dr. Collins raised her eyebrows in surprise. She had never seen a royal guard abandon his post, but she could see the genuine concern in James's eyes. "Are you sure about this? Won't you get in trouble?" she asked. "Some things are more important than rules," James replied, helping the paramedics carefully lift Sarah onto the stretcher. The crowd gasped and began talking excitedly among themselves. This was definitely not something they expected to see as they loaded Sarah into the ambulance. James climbed in beside her. His tall frame looked out of place in the small medical vehicle, and his bright red uniform stood out against the white interior, but he didn't seem to care about how strange it looked. During the ride to St. Mary's Hospital, James held Sarah's hand and kept talking to her to make sure she stayed awake. He told her about his hometown in Scotland, his family, and even some funny stories about his training days. Sarah managed to smile a few times despite her pain. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked weakly. "You don't even know me." James thought for a moment before answering. "My little sister was in a car accident 2 years ago. She was alone and scared in the hospital, and I wasn't there for her. I promised myself I would never let someone else go through that if I could help it." Dr. Collins listened to their conversation while monitoring Sarah's vital signs. She was touched by James's kindness and couldn't help but smile at this unlikely pair. When they arrived at the hospital, news crews were already waiting outside. Someone from the crowd had called the media, and word was spreading quickly about the royal guard who had abandoned his post to help an injured girl. Camera flashes went off as James helped carry Sarah's stretcher into the emergency room. Inside the hospital, the medical team quickly took Sarah into surgery to repair her broken arm and clean her leg wound.
Out.
James waited outside in the corridor, still in his wet uniform, refusing to leave even though hospital staff offered to call him a taxi back to the palace. Hours passed, and James remained in his chair, ignoring the phone calls from his commanding officer. Their patients and hospital visitors recognized him and asked for photos, but he politely declined, explaining that he was there for a friend who needed him. Finally, Dr. Collins emerged from surgery with good news. "Sarah is going to be fine," she announced. "The surgery went well, and she should make a full recovery. She's been asking for you." James felt relief wash over him as he followed the doctor to Sarah's room. But he knew that his decision to stay with her would have serious consequences for his career. His phone had been buzzing non-stop with calls from the palace, and he would have to face his superior soon. Sarah opened her eyes slowly as James entered her hospital room. Her arm was in a cast, and her leg was bandaged, but she was alive and alert. When she saw James still in his Royal Guard uniform, she smiled weakly. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I told you I would," James replied, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you," Sarah said. "The doctors told me you probably saved my life by stopping the bleeding. I don't know how to thank you." Before James could respond, his phone rang again. This time, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The caller ID showed it was Colonel Harrison, his commanding officer. James took a deep breath and answered the call. "Thompson? Where the hell are you?" Colonel Harrison's voice boomed through the phone. "You were supposed to report back hours ago, and now I'm seeing you all over the news." "Sir, I can explain," James began, but the colonel cut him off. "Get back to base immediately." "We'll discuss this in my office," the colonel ordered before hanging up. Sarah could see the worry in James's eyes. "You're in trouble because of me, aren't you?" she asked. "It's not your fault," James assured her. "I made the choice to stay, and I'd make the same choice again." Just then, Sarah's parents, David and Margaret Mitchell, rushed into the room. They had driven down from Manchester as soon as they received the call about the accident. Margaret immediately hugged her daughter while David shook James's hand firmly. "Thank you for saving our daughter," David said, his eyes filled with tears. "The nurses told us what you did. We can never repay you." "You don't need to repay me," James replied. "I'm just glad Sarah is okay." Margaret wiped her eyes and looked at James with admiration. "Young man, you're a hero. What you did today shows real character," as the Mitchell family talked with James. The story was spreading like wildfire on social media. Videos of James helping Sarah and riding in the ambulance were being shared thousands of times. People were calling him a real-life hero and praising him for putting humanity before duty. The hashtag Royal Guard Hero was trending on Twitter, and news stations around the world were picking up the story. Interviews with witnesses from the scene painted James as a selfless soldier who risked his career to help a stranger, but not everyone was happy about the attention. Back at the palace, Colonel Harrison was facing pressure from his superiors about James's actions. Breaking protocol was a serious offense. There would have to be consequences. Meanwhile, James finally left the hospital late that night, knowing he had to face the music. As he walked toward the taxi that would take him back to base, reporters surrounded him with microphones and cameras. "Guard Thompson, how do you respond to people calling you a hero?" One reporter asked. James stopped and looked directly into the camera. "I'm not a hero. I just did what any decent person would do. Sarah needed help and I was there to give it. That's all." His simple, honest answer only made people admire him more. But James knew that his superiors might see things very differently. The next morning, James stood at attention in Colonel Harrison's office, still wearing his dress uniform. The colonel sat behind his desk with a stern expression, holding a folder full of newspaper clippings and printed internet articles about the incident. "Thompson, in my 25 years of service, I have never seen such a blatant disregard for protocol," Colonel Harrison began. "You abandoned your post, interfered with a civilian emergency, and brought unwanted media attention to the Royal Guard." James remained silent, knowing that speaking out of turn would only make things worse. But inside, he felt no regret for his actions. However, the colonel continued, his tone softening slightly. "I've been receiving phone calls all morning. The hospital director called to thank you for your quick thinking. Sarah Mitchell's family has written a letter praising your character. And most surprisingly, I received a call from Buckingham Palace." James's eyes widened slightly, but he kept his composure. "It seems your story has reached very high places, Thompson. The royal family has been following the news coverage, and they want to meet with you this afternoon." James couldn't hide his surprise this time. "Sir, you heard correctly. Your actions, while technically against regulations, have shown the kind of character and compassion that the Royal Guard should represent. The palace wants to discuss your future with the force." Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Sarah was recovering well, but couldn't stop thinking about
James. Her room was filled with flowers and get-well cards from strangers around the world who had heard her story.
News crews were still stationed outside the hospital, hoping to get another interview. Sarah's best friend, Lucy, had come to visit and couldn't believe all the attention her friend was receiving. "Sarah, you're famous," Lucy exclaimed, showing her friend the latest social media posts about the accident. "I don't want to be famous," Sarah replied. "I just want to make sure James doesn't get in trouble for helping me. He risked everything for a complete stranger." Dr. Collins entered the room with good news. "Sarah, your recovery is going very well. We should be able to discharge you tomorrow if you continue to improve." "Doctor, have you heard anything about the guard who helped me? Is he in trouble?" Sarah asked anxiously. Dr. Collins smiled. "Actually, I heard through the hospital network that he's meeting with some very important people today. It sounds like his story has made quite an impression." That afternoon, James walked through the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, escorted by a senior aide. He had been to the palace many times as a guard, but this was different. Today he was here as himself, not just as a uniform. He was led into an elegant sitting room, where he was asked to wait. James stood at attention, unsure of what to expect. After a few minutes, the door opened, and a distinguished gentleman in a suit entered. "Guard Thompson." "Thank you for coming," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Sir William Ashworth, private secretary to His Majesty. Please, have a seat." James sat down carefully, still somewhat overwhelmed by the situation. "Your actions yesterday have caused quite a stir, young man. The royal family has been very interested in your story. They believe you exemplify the very best qualities of service and compassion." Sir William paused and smiled. "In fact, they would like to offer you a new position within the household, one that would allow you to use both your military training and your natural instinct to help others." James listened in amazement. Sir William explained the opportunity. It seemed like his act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. 3 months later, Sarah walked into the grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace using only a walking stick for support. Her leg had healed beautifully, and the doctors said she would make a complete recovery. She was wearing a simple but elegant blue dress that her mother had helped her choose for this special occasion. The ballroom was filled with distinguished guests, members of the royal family, military officials, and media representatives from around the world. Sarah felt nervous as she took her seat in the front row, but she was incredibly proud to be there. James stood at attention near the front of the room, but today he was wearing a different uniform. Instead of his traditional Red Guard uniform, he wore the dress uniform of the newly created Royal Community Service Corps, a program that had been established partly because of his actions. Sir William Ashworth stepped forward to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to honor a young man who showed us that true service means putting others before yourself, even when it comes at great personal cost." The crowd listened intently as Sir William recounted the events of that rainy day 3 months ago. He spoke about James's quick thinking, his compassion, and his willingness to break protocol to help someone in need. Guard James Thompson's actions that day reminded us all that behind every uniform is a human being with the capacity for extraordinary kindness. His story has inspired thousands of people around the world and has shown us what it truly means to serve others. James was called forward to receive the newly created Medal of Compassionate Service, the first of its kind. As he approached the podium, he caught Sarah's eye in the crowd. She smiled and gave him a thumbs up, just like she had done every week when he visited her during her recovery. After receiving his medal, James was given the opportunity to speak. He looked out at the crowd of important people and dignitaries, but his eyes found Sarah's face. 3 months ago, I made a decision that felt completely natural at the time. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped them. I never expected it to lead to all of this, James said, gesturing to the grand ceremony around him. But what I've learned since then is that small acts of kindness can have effects we never imagine. Sarah Mitchell and I became friends that day, and through our friendship, I've learned that helping others isn't just a duty, it's what makes us human. The crowd applauded warmly as James continued. The new Royal Community Service Corps will work with hospitals, schools, and community centers across the country. Our goal is to show that service isn't just about guarding buildings or following orders, it's about building connections and helping our fellow citizens when they need us. After the ceremony, James and Sarah stood together on the palace balcony looking out at the London skyline. Sarah's parents and James's family had joined them for the celebration. "Ken, you believe all this happened because I was running late to art class?" Sarah laughed. James chuckled. "I'm glad you were running late. Otherwise, we might never have met, and I might never have learned what I was really meant to do with my life." Sarah looked at her friend seriously. "James, you saved more than my life that day. You showed everyone that caring about strangers isn't weakness, it's strength." 6 months later, the Royal Community Service Corps had grown to include 50 members who worked throughout London and beyond. James had been promoted to lead the program, and his story continued to inspire people to help others in their communities. Sarah had returned to her art studies and was working on a series of paintings about kindness and human connection. Her first exhibition, titled "When Strangers Become Heroes," featured a portrait of James that had become famous around the world. Their friendship, born from a moment of crisis, had grown into something that neither of them could have expected. James had found his true calling. And Sarah had discovered that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The story of the Royal Guard who carried an injured girl too. Safety had become more than just a news story. It had become a reminder that in a world that often seems cold and disconnected, there are still people willing to risk everything to help a stranger in need.